At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Elijah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Well, it is great. And last time we were talking about the effigy breathing, and
Yeah.
it was so fascinating. And I actually tried your 3-minute one, and I'm not sure that it lasted more than a minute and a half, which I don't know what that says, but but fascinating. And then you're doing so many other things, and we had talked about so many things that we couldn't get to that I really wanted to have a further discussion about that. Plus,
Yeah.
you've either writing or you've written a new book, and
Yeah.
it looks like that's a few different things. So again, if the audience doesn't get a chance to hear your first one, go ahead and share
Yeah.
again with the audience who you are and what brought you
Yeah.
to this point.
So I was exposed to a breathwork technique when I was in my mid-20s, and it was 1990s, so almost 35 years ago. It was very powerful. And I lived in Canada at the time. I followed my teacher out to California. I trained with him. I ran his empire, so to speak, for 10 years. And then I tried every breathwork technique that was out there, and I ended up developing my technique, which is called Effiji Breathwork, which is basically a conscious hyperventilation. That was what you're doing for 3 minutes. If somebody does it in a session, it's an hour.
Yeah.
And as you could see, for a minute and a half, it's a very rigorous and powerful technique, and it's stuck with me all these years because it opens up the body's energy and clears trauma, connects you to your unconscious, connects you back to who you're really meant to be. And I've done, this with tens of thousands of people. It's been very powerful. But over the years, of working with people and traveling and training is that something I notice is that there's the realization that you have when you do this breath work that takes you back to like these core feelings of who you really are, that visceral, powerful, passionate person that you're meant to be to fulfill your life purpose. But in talking to people and the complexity of people's lives, what I really began to see is that fulfilling your life purpose and actually actualizing, executing your real self out in your life was much more complex than just laying down for an hour and like having this realization. Like, to live it, you have work to do because you have to go out into the world, and the world's a complex place, and you have many habit patterns within your body, mind, if you will, that even if you awaken in some way and you become clear, that doesn't mean that your body all of a sudden changes. Your behaviors even change. Your mind can change somewhat, but there's still all this work to do. So in 1999, I started studying internal martial arts, Tai Chi, with a teacher in San Francisco, and eventually he used to bring many masters over from China. He's a very open guy. His name's George Xu, meaning as a Chinese man, he was very open to sharing the history and the culture. He spoke English fluently. He would bring these masters over and he would expose us to them. But in 2014, I went to China and I just fell in love with it. I was just absolutely knocked out. Didn't speak a word of it. But he put all these masters together, living great masters left of this ancient form at a camp, and we got to study with them. And I got connected to this one guy who spoke a little bit of English, and I just emailed him. I started learning Mandarin. I went back to China every 3 months for 5 years. I went
Wow.
21 times, and to Taiwan, and I studied with lots of masters. I learned Mandarin, and just before the pandemic, I went 5 times in 2019. Actually, last trip I took January 2020 was to Chengdu, which is the next town over from Wuhan. I got home and I got so sick and didn't know why. But anyway, while I was home during the pandemic, in all those years of studying, I did not realize that all these martial arts forms, these that are thousands of years old, are based on Taoism. And Taoism is basically it's God as the natural world. It's physics, meaning just the universal laws of, the laws of like Newton's third law, that sort of thing. That's what it's based on. But it's also animals intelligence, and elements, five elements. And during the time of the pandemic, I just had this broader awakening for myself of how to use these movements as personal development to retrain these aspects of the self that aren't really affected by, certainly by, the breath work. Because I always say that the breath work is this powerful thing to clear, but it doesn't train you for anything. So my most recent book, The Trauma Code, was 3 times longer. I cut out almost all the stuff about the movements because I couldn't. You said to me for the podcast, like, well, people aren't going to learn this by listening to a podcast. Like, you can't really learn my work without doing it. So I held
Right.
that back. I finished that book, and this year I'll be putting that book out with programs. And the book's called From Realization to Manifestation: The Four Levels of Mind and the Four Regions of the Self. And these four levels of mind are internal processes that are four different minds, and then the four regions, which are the part of the manifestation, is from your center of yourself to three other larger centers, and how to develop them so that you can start from an intention and then manifest.
Well, and I want to talk about each of those, if you don't mind. I
Okay,
think that would be fascinating. And
sure.
I think you've made such an interesting point, Elijah, is that, we can become aware, we can become conscious, mindful of all that junk that's going on in our lives that's causing us to behave in a certain way that's not really in our best interest. And yet, to make that change, to be able to be aware of that and then to make the actual change where we change the neurological aspect of it, we change our habits, we change our patterns to the point where we literally have changed, is not easy. And it sounds like that's what you're talking about.
Well, it's funny because you did a minute and a half of the breath and you're like, that's enough. And last night I had a class, and for people talked for an hour and a half. Like, I did like a group chat first, and I gave feedback and talked, and people were talking about the complexity of their lives. And then a lot of people who've done the breath, it's like, oh God, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to do. And I was like, you have 23 other hours of the day, way harder. This breath work's just 1 hour. Like, living your life and being a clear human being, it is, I mean, that's the gold standard. If I can look at life from a clear place, perceive correctly, and then follow up with every step being exactly in alignment with my intention and who I really am, this is what I think is the hardest job on earth, and the only one that matters in a way.
Well, it is. And with the new book, from realization to manifestation, you talk
Mhm.
about the four levels of the mind. Can you kind of share with the
Yeah,
audience what are they? And you can
sure.
expand a little bit on each one of them.
Yeah, thank you. I have been sort of teaching it over the last 5 years, but it's taken me almost 5 years to say it, is simply because even people who work with me will sometimes they'll glaze over if I'm being too dense about it. So I say it this way. We know, as Eastern culture came over to the West, we learned about meditation. We learned about the idea of the mind, and Western psychology mixed with Eastern philosophy has brought meditation and mindfulness and these things into our culture. But the mind is thought of as sort of this, we're talking about like our inner dialogue, our linear process, our way. But I say there's four minds, four levels of the mind. very most simple one that everyone can relate to. So I'll tell you the four levels are the animal level of the mind, the linear level, the energetic level, and the visionary level. So the animal level is like the body mind. So what I call them minds is because your mind as conscious beings, our thinking, the one that we're talking about for meditation, is a tool. It's not our consciousness. It's so when you meditate, you try not to identify with what you're thinking because we're all pretty crazy, you know. So that, but it's a process that takes information and organizes it. So the body mind is another level of the mind at the level of sensation. If you have a pain in your neck or you get butterflies in your stomach, that's a mind. So the animal level is easy to explain as the physical body, and where I center that in my work is in the feet because the feet are what makes you grounded.
Hmm.
As the animal part of you has to be on the ground. Um, the linear and the animal I associate with this is the chicken because the chicken's been descended from dinosaurs that are 250 million years old. They are the masters of being on the earth, and all of the footwork and Tai Chi and every internal martial arts is based on chicken feet. If you ever
Interesting.
watch chicken and you watch Tai Chi, the feet are the same. Interesting, yeah. And no teacher told me that until like after 30 years. I just brought it up and then anyway. But the linear level is the one that we all know and love. Our wonderful thinking faculty of rights and wrongs and like the calculation and perception that we have between in and out. This level is a structural level, meaning that it's how you organize, create skill, create stability and security. And this is through the bones, ligaments, and tendons in the body. It's how we stand up and have posture and adapt, both be secure, but also be able to change.
Right.
This is the nature of the mind. If a mind is healthy, a mind is open and adaptable, but clear and sequenced and coordinated. But if you have a crazy mind, you have disorganization, not sequenced, not secure, or rigid, and like arthritis. So the animal with this is the snake, which is a head with a skeletal body. And if you touch the head of the snake, you touch the tail of the snake. It's all working as one. So working with all the joints, ligaments, tendons in the body is the linear mind. The energetic mind is the one that moves away from the physical to more the space between matter. This is this is what a lot of internal martial arts Tai Chi is based on. Like Chi is energy. It's what is there inside the space. And from my point of view, this is like it's the self, it's the creativity of who you are. It's the potential of when you imagine and you start to creatively think about, okay, I'm going to make a podcast and how I go about and do that. Before you do it, which is the linear mind, you make a plan and then your animal mind does it. You imagine, you create, you work with the possibility of something before it's happened. The Taoists have this word, shi, which means potential, but in Mandarin, it basically means like the trend of a wave, meaning scientifically, the wave's going to do exactly what it's going to do. You can't change the physics of the trend of a wave, but as a Taoist term, potential means you know what the potential of something is and you don't get in the way of it. You follow that. So if I throw a ball and the ball goes somewhere, that's one thing. But if I take my arm and I don't have a ball and I throw, that's potential energy. It's not actually happening. It's happening in the invisible world, but not in actuality. So the energetic world is the one that most people are trying to develop when you want to develop spiritually. You have to let go of structure and learn how to become who you're meant to become and work with the path of least resistance. The animal
Okay.
path.
And you talk about energy and those type of things. You know,
Yeah.
quantum physics how that's become a real buzzword in the meditation community and so forth.
Yeah.
Where does that fit in, or does it fit in, or is it just the same?
Well,
Is it the words for the same thing?
yeah, I mean, let me be clear. I'm a mystic, not a scientist. And a mystic is someone who likes to experience the mystery and live in it. So I would be an idiot to talk about quantum physics. But one thing that I do know about the quantum reality, just from
Yes.
reading, is that like we, as our humans, we in our five senses, which is we we may in science measures things based on what can be proven, like physics is physical, it's the physical world. And so if what holds a building up, it's like its resistance, it's all these things that we can measure. But metaphysics is the study of what's beyond matter. And
Yes.
in the quantum reality, they find, like if you go in a microscope, the more you look into something, the more space there is, right? So, that a line is really just like a bunch of spaces. So the quantum reality speaks to this energetic part, which is there's a reality beyond what your five senses is able to measure. And science and medicine are wonderful, but 100 years ago they were using whiskey and pliers to do dentistry. So, and now they're doing vaccines, but 100 years from now they're going to say, "What, you had cancer and you gave people toxic chemicals and told them to make them feel better." Like it's all evolving, is what I'm saying. So science and medicine is on the cusp now of really figuring out how to use the unseen world. I mean, preventative medicine and mental health is the beginning of that. You're talking about things that aren't, it's not your broken arm. So,
Yes,
yeah,
and I know factually that there are those scientists now that are studying the energetic capabilities that we
totally.
would call coming from the quantum area
Yeah,
that is literally healing people. And they're just
yeah.
absolutely flabbergasted at the tests that they're running and the results that they're achieving. So that gets to be interesting. When you were talking about the snake, you were talking about the chicken and so forth, you've talked about animals. And
Yeah.
I from the last time you were talking about the tiger and some of those, and I found that
Mm,
fascinating. But we really didn't get into that. And I had a sense that as you're talking about the movement, the Taoist movement,
yeah.
that part of that is represented in or mimicking some of that movement. Was my understanding correctly in that?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really intelligent what you said. Well, first, you asked to say the four levels. So the fourth level is the third level is the cat. The cat is super relaxed, lazy, domestic, follows the path of least resistance. You ever watch a cat stalk a mouse? It just sits there, does nothing, and then boom, it jumps, and like you could see its energy goes first and its body goes second. So the fourth level is a visionary level, which is a tiger, and that's your ability to merge with what has not happened. But you have to have a vision. You have to have the ability to imagine something this is different than what I'm saying about creativity. And the reason why I bring this up is my friend who's a family marriage, he said, "Well, can your system, if I'm a serial killer, can I use your system to manifest?" And then he made a really good point, which is this isn't a moral system. I use the breath work for people to get in touch with who they really are.
Hmm.
The visionary level, you can have a vision that's a wrong vision. But the idea is that if you have the vision that's connected to what you're meant to be, then you're intending something. And this is a different word than potential. The word for the Taoists have is E, which is it's it's the ability to project your own intention out into the world. So this is what a tiger does. They can project out and merge with something very far away from them. And then they crouch down and they wait and then they leap into it. So all the animals help you to understand something about the natural world and how it works within your own body. And and just to say, Taoist movements like the Tai Chi is only 400 years old. It's an amalgamation of all these martial arts styles that go back thousands of years that are based on these 10 animals, like almost 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So,
Actually, as I was looking at that a little bit, I came across the concept of qigong.
yeah,
The Qigong, and I think it's
yeah,
pronounced qigong,
yeah.
which is a lot
Chi
older.
just gong means work. If you go to work, gongzo. Gong just means work, and chi means well, chi means gas, but it's energy. So, but it's used as to describe the life force work. So qigong is just really energy work.
Okay.
So qigong strips out all the relational parts of internal martial arts, all the martial parts, meaning my system is to teach you how to have a relationship with the world because that's what these animal movements do. Even though they are about martial things, attack and defense, it's about giving and receiving. It's about being masculine and feminine, about open and close. It's all based on the Tao, the yin yang symbol. But Qigong takes all of the choreography out and just sticks with the medical part of it, the part
Okay.
that's healing to you in your energy. And then
Okay.
they have these very simple movements for
Yeah, I was
health.
just curious about that. So,
Yeah.
so as you talk about these movements, we did, and it's tough, I know, on video. Well, it
Yeah.
isn't tough on video, but it's tough on audio. But when we talk about the tiger, and you talk about movement being a part of actually manifesting, and
Yeah.
once you had the realization, then the manifesting. How does one do that, particularly because you have different age groups, I'm sure, that you're working with, and they're the younger ones and the middle-aged ones that
Yeah.
can do that easily. Older ones maybe not able to do
Yeah.
that so well.
Well, it's true, and now I'm turning 61, so my demographic is older than it was 10 years ago. And I was last year just taught Tai Chi at the park right by my house, and there wasn't a person under 60. And mobility and energy is the big issue when you start getting older.
Right.
So the movements actually from a qigong perspective, the movements are for health because if you're natural in your body and you learn the principles of these movements, you're going to be healthy. But to answer your question, we modify. And some of the animals are harder to do than others. Like the tiger is definitely, I mean, they're all hard, they're all challenging in their own way, but the tiger has some amount of leaping in it. But we modify and we just like, okay, Doug's an old tiger. He doesn't, he does, he just steps, he doesn't jump,
Okay.
And that's something over the years I've learned how to do is that if somebody's 80, it's different. And if somebody's 20, I make them go a lot lower and I make them go a lot farther. I just make it harder on because the lower you go, the more energy you need, the stronger your body needs to be. So
So,
yeah,
so
we
we're really
modify.
talking about Tai Chi then. Is that correct?
No, no. Well, what I didn't really say the whole thing, but Tai Chi, somebody about 400 years ago took all the principles of Taoism that are found in all the different styles. There's these different styles: Lancho, Xinyi, Baguazhang, Tongbei, all these different systems, and they put it together in this. Is that? I don't know what that is. I'm on someone else's computer. Oh, and my person's being FaceTimed. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm in Kentucky right now teaching, so I'm on a yeah. So and they supposedly maybe they were trying to overthrow the dynasty and they wanted to practice, so they like did these movements in slow motion. That's something one of my teachers told me, but it's suffice to say that whoever put it together took all these systems and made this very, very complex theoretical system of movements that brings all these systems together. So Tai Chi is the most complex to learn because so many movements and it's very slow. And if you don't understand all the principles of it, like it's very confusing. And also ancient practice people think it is. The style that came over to the West from China, Yang style, which you see in all the parks, certainly in America, uh, was invented in like the 1800s. It's not
Wow.
even that old. So, yeah. So
So then
that's
when you're talking about the Taoist movements, what kind of movement are you talking about?
I'm taking the essence of these 10 animals. I'll just say what they are.
Okay.
So we had rooster, chicken, we have snake, cat, and tiger. And then the four, and that's all what I call the vertical plane. It's inner process. It's the four levels of the mind. This is
Okay.
something to develop clarity and being grounded from spirit to earth. But the horizontal plane is from your dantian, which is your center, or the hara they call it, or your second chakra. That's the bear, the hungry bear, right in your center. And then the second region of the self is the body layer. That's the dragon. This is, to be clear, the Chinese dragon, which is not a fire breathing evil creature. It's a
Right.
joyous, abundant creature. Um, and infinite possibility of movements. It's also really the essence of yin yang, which is the dragon spirals one way in one direction and another way opposite spiral in opposite direction. If you see those parades, so the dragon teaches the opposite, the power of opposition, and then the third region. I have two animals because it's relational. It's the horse and the monkey, which is about the oracle. That's when you go out and you actually start to have relationship with the world around you. So you have the monkey, the naughty monkey, and the brainy monkey for relational things, and the horse with its horsepower and strong legs and discipline for taking long journeys. And then the fourth region of the self is the transpersonal region, which is the eagle and the hawk, which see everything but focus in on the thing they want in that. It's our shared matrix, the transpersonal layer. It's the one that's allowing you and I to have a podcast. We're sharing that center. So when I call it a center, it's your center, your dantian, also shared with others. So four centers. And now I
So
forgot your question.
in the book or with some of your
Yeah,
videos or whatever, do you
yeah,
show those movements and are people able to
yeah,
access that so that they can literally experience what those movements are? And then how do you go
yeah.
about utilizing those movements and do you do it in a
Mm.
specific order in order to start to create that manifestation?
You asked you should I should get your advice on running a business. You're a
Well,
very clear thinker.
I used to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, see, that's your linear mind. That's the linear level of
Yeah,
the
I
mind, is that
know,
you
I
have a
know.
sequential, organized brain. Probably your strength and potentially your weakness if you spend too much time there. Um, so if I'm working with somebody individually, I'm going, you got to learn all of them, but I'll just pick a movement with somebody in relationship to whatever it is that they're working on and show them the movement and get them to work on it. Next year, starting February, I have a 9 month training, a trauma release training where some people are being trained to be breathwork facilitators. Everybody's in personal development. And the beginning and the end are in person, like 5 days. So we do breath work and movement, and I'm sharing all that in person. But people will get a copy of the book and also, companion videos that go with it and explain. And then uh, it does need to be, it really does need to be taught in person because mm, there's an energy to it. Feel my body, like see it, let me make adjustments in you and all that. So, it's not something I unfortunately can teach online. I haven't figured that part. I don't think it's possible. I mean, I did teach movement during the pandemic online and Qigong stuff, but it's a complex substance. It's 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
And and when people learn Tai Chi or even martial arts, they're still not really dealing with the Taoist part of it, which I had I've studied with so many Chinese masters in the States and in China and in Taiwan. Not one of them talked about Taoism because it's it's too complex. But the thing is, our Western minds, we're interested in the technology and how it works in a way that people over there, they're very existential. They just do it and it's very natural to them. But I'm interested in why did they develop these movements? What are they for? What does it teach you about life? And that part of it is that's my joy when I'm with people is like, oh, you say you you don't want to have a dream. You're a really practical person. Well, why can't you imagine something that you want for yourself, or why can't you bring it into existence? And then we start to look at it and you start to find out where people's processes, if you're Canadian, I am, are not working correctly. As I said, it's not moral. These are functions of who you are. And they need to be retrained because we have trauma and conditioning that move us away from the natural world. Taoism, these movements are showing you how to be in harmony with your environment, even
So
though it's
how
martial arts, but it's
yeah,
about your mastery of
how does
you
a
know,
regular person that's listening to this podcast right now and go, wow, I really find that fascinating. They're not necessarily going to be able to join you for the
yeah,
amount of weeks that you're talking about. How do they
yeah.
learn about this and learn how to apply it in their lives, just as a normal
Well,
person?
I think there's probably a lot you could get from re-listening to this podcast. Because even if you, I mean, the first part is just if somebody agrees with or likes the idea of it, then there's just something there for them to reflect on for themselves. And
Uh-huh.
like how does this apply to you? Like my book, The Trauma Code, which is sort of a first step, we just finished a set of videos that will go with it, a very inexpensive program they do in themselves called the Trauma Code Experience, where they apply the ideas of my work to themselves. And I think that I'm speaking to you naturally, very philosophically, just about this overview. But I think, like anything, if somebody's interested in something, anything, you have to start somewhere. Like you have to find some place, some entry point. Because to me, the only reason why I'm on this podcast and I'm talking to you about it is because I hope people will do something for themselves. They don't even have to do my work. Just do. I want people to grow and to help themselves. So that's not. We already have enough books and podcasts and things. There's so much out there for people to fill themselves with information. The power to live your life as you're meant to be that's the linear level. That's all of society training the linear level. If you really want to manifest who you are, you have to go beyond that. You have to take risks. You have to be creative. You have to start to understand yourself. And you don't need to be good at any of this in the same way you don't need to be good at my movements. It's about finding an entry point and just be willing. You're an Aries. Just do it because we can make mistakes. Like that's the beautiful part of being human is we're just mistake making machines who are looking to find our way back to perfection.
Well,
So
true. And you know, it's interesting
yeah.
because I went online. I wanted to prepare even a little bit better for this. And so I went on and typed in the Taoist movements. And
Mm.
the main thing that came up was Tai Chi, which was fascinating.
It's
Tai Chi came up and then Qigong came up. And those were the two main ones. And what you're saying literally is Tai Chi is extremely complicated. And what you're talking about and what you do is not really that complicated.
well, two things. One, I think Tai Chi's complicated in a way like meditation is. Like meditation is actually the end of the journey. Like sit and do nothing and watch your breath. Like that's the hardest thing in the world. Like you have to already be able to sit still before you can achieve a state of meditation. My the thing that we don't have in the West and people don't know about is that the systems that are even people in China, and I've had so many Chinese people from China in my classes in the States who've said, I'm teaching things they don't teach in China. It's all under the surface there, and the Chinese are not great marketers. They're good copycats, not innovators. So it's not like yoga. People don't really know what any of this really is. And these systems like Xingyi is one of my favorite. People can look that up. Xingyi. Xingyi are animal movements that are thousands of years old, and they um my Xingyi teacher, I that's why I bring it up. Hey, stop it. There's a dog barking. I don't know. So my friend's dog's name is Pants, by the way. She gave me the name Pants so she can say pants off. Anyway, um, so my senior teacher said to me in 2019, he said, you want to learn 85 movements in Tai Chi. You practice every day and then you don't practice for a week. You forget all of it. He said, you learn one animal and get that in your body, one animal movement, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. And you don't need a big space to do it. Tai Chi, you need a big space.
Uh-huh.
You need to be like, because you're moving around a lot. So one movement could change your life, but Tai Chi is so much choreography. And you have to get main, my third Tai Chi teacher was a mechanical engineer. And he would sit there and say, no, 42 and a half degrees, not 45 degrees. Like he would get so particular about the angles. Most people do not have the patience
No.
to do that. And my other teacher, my first Thai teacher, George Shu, you can look him up, XU. He's quite famous around the world because he speaks English and he travels all over. But he'd say, who cares? Lion's chasing you. You better run. Like, who cares what angle it is? Like run. So
So if someone is wanting to just initially, as you say, learn one animal movement,
yeah,
um, and this just comes from my linear mind, is there one
yeah.
animal that if someone's really trying to do that personal development, is there one
Well,
animal that works better than others?
Well, I think that the when I begin the there are three animals that I will focus on the most, but I'd say two between the linear level of mind and the energetic level, which is really between the mind and the heart, between the masculine and feminine, is a lot of what people are working on. Like because because of trauma and conditioning,
Right.
people's minds aren't very clear, and people are averse to being in their heart. So the snake and the cat are kind of two fundamental movements, but snake movements can be. Actually, let me see if I can say this to a listener who's not watching something, because the cat is about moving without resistance, and it's more kind of qigong like. It's a kind of has a thing in the heart center. But the snake, I would say, is that if you were to put your arm out in front of you, anybody, and you try to first turn your joints in your shoulders and then turn your joints in your elbows, just turn, and I'm just making a circle, and then just do it in your wrists and then your fingers. You're just moving all the joints in the body. You have just, people can think of this, you have five snakes. You have your arms, your two legs, and your spine. Qigong, which is good for arthritis, is about keeping the mobility of all the joints, to having them, your head be the head of the snake, telling each of your joints to move both independently of each other if you want, and then have them all move together. And I'm not necessarily giving you an exact movement, but that's sort of what snake
Yeah, but that's
movements
very
are about.
descriptive. I love that. So you've got the snake, you've got the cat. What's the third one? So you mentioned that there were three that you
Well,
really
the
like to
chicken.
focus on. Chicken.
Yeah. And I would say that if I was being really super simple to people, like one time I went through the TSA, the security at the airport, and there was a
Uh-huh.
blind woman going through, and like she, you could see that her eyes were in her feet. You could see it because her feet were, she was tracking through her feet.
Hmm.
And that's really the chicken, is that, and I had chickens at one point. I mean, they're hilarious and interesting, but you can't hardly catch them because they can change direction. They have these big fat bodies and these tiny skinny legs. They never fall over. They sleep standing up on a perch. So they have perfect balance, and they can change direction instantly. And so there's two parts of the chicken. There's that part, and then there's the rooster part, which is the pecking order and the territoriality. But as far as being grounded goes, because there's really at the essence of my work are two things: being grounded, being centered. When you have trauma or you're away from who you're meant to become, you're usually ungrounded and you're usually uncentered. Ungrounded means your feet aren't on the ground and you're not connected to your vision. Being uncentered is that somebody else has got your center. Somebody else got control of who you are. And as you move out into life, you have to keep your own center. So being grounded is you are walking, somebody's listening to this podcast, you're walking, put your mind in your feet and follow your breath. Just make your breath 4 counts in, 4 counts out, and just feel your feet. And don't think about anything. Just feel your feet on the ground walking. And that alone can do so much for somebody. Tai Chi movements and chicken movements kind of involve going from like heel to toe and heel to toe so that you, like an animal paw, like walking along the ground. And so chicken movements have this kind of like very, if you ever watch chickens, very, very slow and determined and chasing. And then they can speed up and change direction. So you're learning about infinite sort of directional mobility of the feet, but it starts with being grounded.
And as you're doing these movements, what
Mm.
is the result? What happens?
Well, if, I'll say for myself, like I'm not a particularly, I'm a mystic, as they say. So I'm an unstable, intoxicated, creative person.
That's
So
okay.
yeah, but for who I am particularly grounded and centered because of these practices. Like, I mean, the breath work was always sort of easy for me because you get high from it. And
Right.
I always liked the intoxication of going to spirit, but also maybe as an escape from my life, but the movements helped me to be in my body, in the world around me, because the world around me was always a confusing and scary and difficult place, and I was never particularly stable in it. And the movements help me to maintain who I am in the world. And that's really the offering of the movements, is to be grounded and be centered. Because if you have that, you don't you don't complain about the outside. Like I was in my group last night and I asked people what's going on. And at the heart of what everybody was saying was a complaint. It's a relationship or it's society or people don't want to connect or, my back hurts but inside of those complaints is a lack of clarity about how to live your life. And we want to move beyond seeing the outside world as being our determiner, like who won the election, or that's not, your life purpose isn't dependent on the outside. It's dependent on you. So if you can learn how to be grounded and centered, you can learn how to have a relationship with the complex and difficult things that do happen out in the world around you.
Well, and I love that. And I was going to ask you for a message, but you just gave it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
just gave it. So I think that's fantastic. Well, Elijah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
This has been fascinating, and I think for the audience listening to this, it's not easy to totally adapt the whole thing to it, and yet I think one of the things that you said that's for me so powerful is that as you consciously start to do some of these movements, and you've talked about 3 that I think anyone can do, that
Yeah.
it literally helps you to become centered, it helps you to become grounded, and it literally can help you to mindfully and consciously start to manifest who you really are and the dreams
Yes.
and the goals and the desires that you have. And so I really appreciate that. Again, how do people find you?
Effiji Breath, EFFIJI Breath. And the Trauma Code Experience will be coming out in the next week, and that has movement in it. And there are videos you can do on your own, and also reach out to me. And Doug, thanks so much again, because I really enjoyed talking to you, and you're so good at bringing things down to a practical level without losing their essence. So
Well,
you're
I
clearly a
appreciate
good
that.
manifester yourself.
Thanks. Well, and
Yeah.
folks, thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this. And you know what? I have gone to his website. It's fascinating. And it's certainly worth going to and checking it out and learning a lot more about this, because it certainly can be one way in which you could truly find out who you are and truly become grounded and being able to manifest the type of life that you want to live. So anyway, this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.